Okay, hopefully you can hear me now. Sorry about that. Very typical of the current pandemic situation. We've all become home television broadcasters during this, and there's a little bit of hiccups along the way. But luckily, as mentioned, I'm so glad to be able to welcome Amanda Petrusich and Thao Nguyen for this conversation, both Headlands alum. And this is part of a time where Headlands is trying to raise money. So I'll talk a little bit about the fundraiser that we're going through at the end of this. But just backing up for a second, one of the great things about being able to bring the program to you this way is that we're able to bring people who are across the country together. And we should have been doing this all along, I think. Being able to have two incredibly smart, super fun, very talented and accomplished artists, writers together this way is just, I don't know, it's really exciting to me. I'm just going to introduce them and then get out of the way. So singer-songwriter Thao Nguyen is the lead musician of Thao and the Get Down, Stay Down. The recently released album Temple is the fifth made with the band and the eighth album she's made overall. Her music is characterized by its innovative blending of multiple and wide-ranging musical genres, and throughout her music and lyrics, you can see a real dedication to social equity and justice. She supported California Coalition for Women Prisoners, Oxfam for America, and many other civic justice groups. In 2016 and 17, Thao made two separate works that focused on her relationships with her individual parents. The album A Man Alive, about her father, and Nobody Dies, a short documentary film chronicling her first visit to Vietnam with her mother. And I've just been very lucky to be able to not only have support Thao's work at the Headlands, but as many of you know, she lives in the Bay Area, so being able to work with her in other contexts has been really rewarding. So I'm really glad you're here, Thao. Amanda Petrusich is a staff writer at The New Yorker and the author of 3 books. She's the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship in Nonfiction and has been nominated for a Grammy Award. Her criticism and features have appeared in The Times, Oxford American, Spin, Pitchfork, GQ, Esquire, The Atlantic, and Virginia Quarterly Review, among others. Her most recent book, Do Not Sell at Any Price, explored the obsessive world of 78 RPM record collectors. And she's also an assistant professor at NYU's Gallatin School. And her most recent article in The New Yorker, I believe at least, are short pieces about a section of John Bolton's memoir where chronicling Donald Trump's weird obsession with the song Rocket Man by Elton John. And it's such a great short piece. I really urge you to look it up. It almost made me want to read that memoir, but I don't think I will still. But thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, Sean, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone out there tuning in tonight to hang with us and especially to support the Headlands, a place that I know means a great deal to both Thao and I. So thank you. Thao, I'm incredibly excited to talk to you about your new record and what I imagine is the extremely kind of strange and perhaps surreal experience of releasing, you know, new art into a time of what certainly feels like unprecedented tumult. So I wanted to start by just kind of asking, checking in and asking how or if these last few months of sheltering in place have changed the way you work or the way that you think about, the practice of songwriting.
Well, first I'll say thank you so much. And I'm so glad to be here, and I'm so glad to be talking to you. Yeah, of course, it's changed everything. And I think it has, I think it's important that we still preface our good fortune when we talk about challenges. And so I will say that I have the privilege of being able to just be home from tour and, take a step back, and that kind of forced slowdown, within which what would typically be a very high octane time. It's been this opportunity to let everything distill and settle, and I've had the opportunity to consider what is still important and what is still vital, and to try to move towards that.
Yeah, it's kind of extraordinary. I feel like when you turn the volume down on everything else, suddenly the volume gets turned up, on some of those internal narratives that are really easy to sort of ignore or, silence in your ordinary life. And I feel like so many people have had that kind of similar experience of awakening. Your new record is titled Temple. And before we talk about it and that, I wanted to play the video for the title track, which I understand you also made while sheltering in place. So Sean, maybe you can cue that up for us. such a beautiful song and such a beautiful video. I mean, just incredibly poignant. I mean, tell me about how the kind of pairing of those visuals with that piece of music kind of came together for you.
Sure. And thank you for saying that. Well, I knew that this would be the lead single for this record, and that this song is such the beating heart of the record. And well, I don't know if you can have more than one North Star. It's one of the North Stars.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to work with that director, Johnny Look, who I made a video with for the previous record for a song called Meticulous Bird. And I just really I just got along so well with Johnny, and I really appreciated his subtlety and his understanding of a song and his aesthetic. And we had discussed with him the idea of dance, because in Temple, the narrative is written from my mom's perspective, and growing up, she would talk about her life before the war and how she went dancing all the time. And she worked for the South Vietnamese embassy, and she was stationed in Laos. And so on the weekend, she would go dancing all throughout Southeast Asia. And then as I grew up, I didn't realize it then, and I didn't value it the way I should have, because I'm a person, that's what we do. But I grew up with my parents and the broader Vietnamese community. I mean, it was a small Vietnamese community, but people would gather and have these dance parties in different basements. And it was just this place and time out of time, and you could sense that, and everyone would dress up, and there would be disco lights, and but everyone knew it was someone's basement. But it just was this chance for refugees of this war to capture a different life, the life that they had. And so we talked to Johnny about capturing that, and the idea of actually incorporating people from the Vietnamese diaspora to be in the video, because at that point, my mom was on the East Coast, we were shooting on the West Coast. There was no way that she could be in it, but I wanted to pay tribute to her.
That's so lovely. And it's lovely to hear you talk too about those pockets of joy, which I feel like frequently get sort of erased from the refugee story, which we think of as, a story chiefly about sort of dislocation or relocation and the kind of difficulty of assimilation and the pain and the anguish of that. But I think so often there are these moments of in watching the video, I think I felt that, and hearing you talk about it too, what a sort of beautiful moment that could be, and how those things persevere. I think Temple, the name of that song and the name of the record is, a word that obviously means very different things to different people. I found it bouncing around my brain a lot when I was in residence at Headlands, because I think I found that the situation and the landscape there sort of allowed for this almost kind of vaguely monastic experience. So I wanted to sort of ask you about your relationship to the word temple, and also the sort of idea of temple.
Mm-hmm. And there are so many it hits on so many levels and exists in different iterations for me, because I grew up, I was raised in a Buddhist family. So every week, or pretty much every weekend, I would go to temple with my mom, and definitely for the major celebrations and for anniversaries of deaths. And it was the one place I had a pretty turbulent upbringing, and it was the one place where I felt, where it was my solace. It was so peaceful, and it was so quiet, and intentionally so. And I just loved going somewhere where no one could talk, and you just had that, you had that space and that kind of sonic latitude. And so it's a nod to that. It's a nod to the culture that I come from, but the most vital part is my modern day interpretation of it, for me. And so my partner Molly helped she designed the album art, and she's a designer, and very graciously, you got indie rock, you got to pull people in. Okay, there's no budget. You're pulling, yeah. Luckily, so Molly's incredible, and we were discussing the idea of temple and what my vision of the album was, and it was actually the creation of a space, which then informed the album art, the creation of a space wherein I could exist as my whole self, because up to, until very recently, I had led a life of a great many divided lives.
Tell me more about those divided lives. Is that, sort of your musician self versus, a different kind of self, or is that more you're sort of invoking the kind of parental lineage and feeling, of one place, but also of this place, East Coast, West Coast? I mean, I can sort of imagine some of the binaries that might exist for you, but can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. All those, but primarily being queer within my family and within the culture I was raised was, a source of a lot of turmoil and discord and a lot of very tense silences. And, one of the reasons I moved to the West Coast, I went to William & Mary, as you both did, which we can talk about for half an hour right after this. But I knew I had to get out of Virginia. I was born and raised in Virginia. I knew I had to get out of there as soon as I could. And I didn't realize it was because I needed to live my full life. I knew, but I didn't say. So as soon as I graduated school, I left to go to San Francisco. But also as soon as I left school, I went on tour. I started touring. And so these bifurcated lives, it was one, it's being queer and no one talks about it, but I can't necessarily bring my whole self home, but then it's also the touring musician thing, which I bought into. I still occasionally buy into it, that idea of like that tumbleweed, transient, all that bullshit, right? But it's there's romance in it, and I created a life wherein I never really was anywhere, and I didn't go home, but I also love my family so much and wanted to be a part of my family so much that I just couldn't bridge whatever had to be bridged, and it's gone on. I mean, I'm 36. It's gone on a long time.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad that you mentioned touring, because I was hoping we would have a chance to talk about that. I feel like I found that for a lot of musicians I've been speaking with lately, this kind of brief respite from touring has actually been really welcome and sort of nutritive and generative for them. And I found myself wondering if this may ultimately lead to a kind of broader rethinking of the traditional revenue models for musicians, which I think are, tend to be predicated on relentless touring, which is really tough on the body, and I think tough on the spirit too, and certainly tough on relationships and your sense of place and home and all those things. I was hoping you could talk a little bit about your relationship to live performance, and what about that you may have been missing, and what about that maybe you're not missing so much?
Mm-hmm. It's like I couldn't nod hard enough when you were saying on this. Live performance, I will say, and I think a lot of tour musicians say this, the actual show that, depending on if you're a support actor, if you're headlining, for 45 minutes to an hour and a half, that is incredible. And that exchange on a good night is sacred. It, for a lot of us, is worth the rest. It's worth the other 23 hours of it's so mundane. You're so tired, you're so lonely, you're all these things. I must say that with, the past few years or the past several years, I've had a really compromised relationship to tour. And I've always wondered how much longer I could go. And I think it's unsustainable in so many ways. I often, reading more about the restaurant industry and what's happening to them, I liken it so much to what's happening to live music, because it's such a razor thin margin, and the things you're asking of people to make a living, it's essentially you're asking them to suspend a dimension of their lives in a dimension of themselves. So I was dreading going back on tour, and now I wonder what's going to happen. Yeah.
Another thing that we're all cut off from in this moment is travel. And I know, Sean mentioned this in his introduction, that in 2017, you were part of a documentary about a trip you took to Vietnam with your mother. And I'm sort of curious about how travel and maybe ideas of place more generally feed your work, and if it's been strange to be sort of grounded for much of this year.
Mm-hmm. It has been really strange, because there is something, I didn't mean to disparage tour so much, because so much of it is actually quite inspiring, because you're so unmoored, but it's really exciting. And I think there's a lot of creativity. There's a lot of fertile ground in being that vulnerable and just kind of off kilter and reacting. You're just reacting the entire time. So that generates a lot of different ideas and a lot of different perspectives that you might not have. I've done most of my writing while traveling and in transit, because there was no other way to work it out.
Yeah, I think those liminal spaces can be kind of fruitful in a way. I have a friend who always jokes that the loneliest moment everyone experiences in their lives is when you're sitting in an airplane, waiting to take off on a runway. There's something about those weird, that kind of awkward in between that I think can, for me at least, it feels inspirational in a funny way, or it allows me to sort of lock into parts of myself that normally I'm not, checking in with any regularity. But for me, I feel like this has also been a really funny and occasionally kind of tense time to be a culture writer, and sort of trying to figure out how my voice fits into some of the, very urgent and certainly necessary conversations we are having as a culture, as a collective right now. I know you've been really active with a lot of community organizations in Oakland, where you live. And I'm curious about how you think about protest and art, and the sort of places where those things may or may not overlap for you.
I think, I very recently came across this interview with I think his last name is Rami Youssef, the guy with the TV show, and he was on Seth Meyers with Patrice Cullors of Black Lives Matter, and they were talking about art and protest, and what he said resonated with me a great deal, which is that the extent, the most that you can ask of art is that it emotionally prepares you to act, to be engaged. And I think I've grappled with that a lot. I think at this point, and other points, I feel late in that. I don't believe I can stop at the music making. I don't believe I can stop at making political music. I think that just is part of this other thing, that the real change is not happening in art. I think it can, I think I used to be more optimistic about what art can do. And now I believe that it's just a portion of what can help lead someone to actual action.
I mean, what do you think facilitated that shift for you because I feel like I've undergone a very similar kind of way of thinking about this, or sort of framing the conversation about it, which, I would regard as sort of, in my younger days, I was kind of naive and I thought art could fix everything. And I still so badly want to believe that, but there's been, for me, a kind of slow and sort of disgruntled dismantling of those ideas, but I still cling to them, or I want to cling to them. It's a hopeful idea, right? That art can really facilitate change. I'll listen to like Masters of War, or, some of the sort of great kind of really resonant protest music of prior generations, and think, well, we can do it. But but what do you think for you kind of, facilitated that change?
I think it's been a long time coming, and it stems from my own kind of internal struggle with how involved I have been with the California Coalition for Women Prisoners, CCWP, which is this incredible prison abolition group, and they advocate. It consists of members inside and out, but is led by people inside. And my 2013 album, We the Common, is entirely about and in tribute to that organization, people I met doing with my prison visits. And I am such a huge fan of grassroots organizers and people who have been doing the work forever and will continue to do it no matter what kind of flash in the pan, coincidental cultural thing happens. They're just there and they're doing it. And they do not suffer fools, and they don't have time for your bullshit, you general, right? They don't have time for my bullshit. They don't have it. They don't have time. And so when I was more involved in like a community member way, I wasn't on tour. It was in between records. And then when I was touring more, and as I have been the past few years, it's really hard to consistently show up. It's hard to be a part of the group in the way that you would want to, in the way that you should be, and all that to say, yeah, I made a record, and and I can try to raise money, all this stuff. But the things it's just been this slow reckoning that I never thought I wasn't on the periphery, but it's sort of the concentric circles of periphery. I just know that what I'm doing, it's not going to change anything in the way that I want it to.
I feel like I could say, well, that's not true, Thao, right? Like your music changes hearts and minds, like it's changed my own, but I feel like part of this conversation is sort of this idea that we live in a culture that doesn't always see art as essential. And I think many of us are taught kind of pretty early on that this work is almost an indulgence of sorts. And I think that's why so many artists and writers kind of accept not being paid for their work, or not being paid properly for their work, or why people sometimes feel like deeply uncomfortable self-identifying as an artist, as if that's a sort of pretentious and preposterous thing for a person to say. And I'm curious if there are times when you struggled with those questions, or of trying to kind of understand your work, the value of your work in a system that maybe isn't necessarily designed to value it.
Oh yeah, I I want to quit music like every other day. I will say that I grew up in a family and a broader community that has no use for artistic pursuits as a living. It's still like, I don't think it can gain a lot of traction. So I've grappled with that on my own, just through my upbringing. And then in a system, yeah, especially with music, well, I don't know, I don't know about your world and others. I will say, it's rare for me to hear about a medium where when you make music, you pretty much have accepted that people will listen to it for free. And that it is just, and what you were saying before about, then we're relegated to touring in this almost unnatural way because it's the only source of consistent income. I don't know how to, I think the life of my career, that life's work, is to figure out how to disentangle my entire self-worth from what people think of what I've made. And I don't, and please tell me how to do it. I don't know how to do it.
I was hoping you could tell me.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. Maybe someone can write in and tell us.
Oh God, Sean, will you, is there like a forum where someone can tell us how to do
That
it.
should be the new thing that goes on the wall on the side of
Yeah.
the main Headlands building. So when I was at Headlands, I found myself kind of encircling my desk with all of these little talismans, like a Monterey pine cone or sort of weird cassette I found on the street in Sausalito, like the Audubon Guide to Western Birds. I'm curious if you have any rituals for writing, and also if you ever get writer's block and how you navigate those waters.
Oh, girl. I've started to breathe more deeply, more frequently. And as I was saying, I grew up Buddhist, and so I say that mantra, Namo Airapa, which is loose translation is like, good job, Buddha. Yeah. And so I repeat that over and over again. And meditating in the mornings was helping. I think that, I don't know how to consistently do that. Even when, I got a timer, I got the app, whatever, that's hard. But when I have writer's block, what I love to do is look up the routines, the daily routines of other writers, and there's like, you just Google it. I'm sure everyone has seen the same thing. But then I came across a book in a bookstore that's actually a collection of these routines. And it doesn't make me write more, but it's like very comforting.
It is. I find myself craving the same thing. It's like I want the really granular details. Like I don't necessarily want the sort of broad-minded kind of expansive philosophy on art making. I want to know, like, but do you snack?
Yeah. And like, when do you exercise?
Yeah.
And how many hours of sleep do you get? And is it okay? Is what I'm doing okay? Is anything okay? Am I okay?
Yeah, totally.
Oh, yeah.
So sort of desperate for any validation. And at Headlands, I would find myself sort of sneaking around the buildings and kind of peering in people's studios. What does it look like when you do it? That
totally.
Sort of just wanting, being so eager to kind of have that communion with other people.
For sure. Yeah. And I would beg people to tell me their difficulties as well.
Yeah.
Like everyone in my cohort, I was like, tell me.
It's so
do you hate yourself today? Or like, did you hate yourself yesterday? Please.
Yeah. Did you cry today? Because I did. Yeah. So this is my last question. We are running out of time, but I am curious if there were records or perhaps texts or photographs or individuals who were really influential for you when you were completing the work that ultimately became Temple.
Oh, yeah. I think, Temple, in addition to being this, the first time I talk about being queer in my work, it's also the first time I talk about being Vietnamese. And I grew up in Virginia. I grew up in a super geared toward, we were geared for assimilation. We were, and so I never thought about being Vietnamese or Asian American. I had so much internalized stuff. And so the Thao Nguyen, who wrote, Sympathizer and Refugees, and his writing and his nonfiction book, I went through the bibliography and I read When Heaven and Earth Change Places, I believe it's called. And so his work was really pivotal. And I actually end up thanking a bunch of writers in the credits of the album. Thi Bui, who is a graphic novelist and writer, and she wrote The Best We Could Do, and that's also about her family and her Vietnamese heritage. And then Tommy Orange. After I read there was just this specificity. I think that in all of my different kinds of shame, I became a very general artist. I became a general writer. And I was drawn to specificity in every form. And so all of there were tons, of course, but Octavia Butler to help me kind of imagine a different world. Yeah.
I mean, it's so interesting to hear you talk about that shift from the general to the specific, and having that sort of mirror, the experience of you kind of coming into your own in a sense, or sort of, understanding and feeling ready to kind of broadcast your identity. I think that's such a powerful thing, like that moment. And I think it's a switch for a lot of people where it's like, okay, now I can talk about this with the really precise language of my experience, rather than, the language I've learned and the language I've sort of figured out is safe. It's a really, really beautiful moment. Well, Thao, thank you so much. I think Sean is going to rejoin us now.
I'm back.
Thank you, Amanda. Hello, Sean.
And there's, of course, somebody mowing outside, so that's a good way to get back on with you here. Thank you both so much for doing this with us, and it's just, I don't know, I've always wanted to get you two specifically into a conversation just after seeing you both work, and you probably have a lot to exchange with each other about your working practices, as you were mentioning. And as the person who's representing the arts organization, just want to be remiss if I didn't say that both of your works have completely changed the way that I think about the world. So I do think that you both have huge effects on at least my my outlook and my ability to imagine the future. I'm just going to tell people a little bit about what's going on with Headlands right now. So we're in the middle of our fundraising season. And I think my colleague Daniel will be putting this link in there, the link you see on your screen right now, into the chat on Twitch. And basically, we have this, if you go to this link, you'll be able to see different ways that you can support artists that are working through Headlands. And we're going to have an auction that begins on July 9th. The auction proceeds, 50% of anything that's sold, any piece of art that's sold, goes to the artist directly. And then Headlands is giving 10% of our proceeds to the Transgender, Gender Variant, and Intersex Justice Project and the Anti-Police Terror Project. And hopefully you can check out those organizations as well. And we have a few more programs coming up next week. Thursday, I think that's the 16th Thursday. I don't know. It's the 16th. Sam Green and JD Sampson, the filmmaker and musician, are collaborating on a sound project. It's going to be really fascinating. I was able to hear some of it, so hopefully you can tune in for that. And we have virtual studio visits happening throughout this time through the end of July. And just thanks once again for being with us tonight, and thanks again to Thao and Amanda. Take care.